Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session, noise reduction in Photoshop. And, well, everyone likes noise reduction, right? Popular topic. But before we go into that, of course, our image of the week goes to Dylan O'Donnell. And Dylan's in the room, so he's going to speak about his image. And I am going to pull it up so I can show it off while he speaks. Dylan, go ahead and talk while I try and get this image up on my screen.
No worries. Thanks very much for Image of the Week. I'm a long-time viewer, and I've really learnt a lot from just watching the presentations here and putting the pieces together. I did this subject last year with a DSLR, and since then I've got a one-shot color CCD, a QHY12, and I really wanted to pull the dust out of the whole region, because I've seen some photos of this region with a real emphasis on the dust, and I just love it. So I've become sort of obsessed with the dust. So what you're looking at is 1 hour of RGB and then 3 hours of HA, and the HA is taken through the one-shot color camera, which I know isn't the best thing to do. You lose that quantum efficiency. Only one pixel is registering any information, but it actually works, and it allows you to pull out this extra faint detail. So I stacked it all together with some help from the Ice and Space Forum, and here it's still not perfect. This is literally fresh off the PixInsight and the sensor. I finished the last hour about 12 hours ago and had a few hours sleep before coming into work today. So yeah, thanks again for Image of the Week. Thanks, guys.
No problem. Thanks for sharing. And I do want to remind everyone that we have that post. It's an image submission thread. You just go in there and share your images and comments, and then you're up for submission, up for whatever in our image of the week. So let's see. Also, after this session, run outside because it's the Geminids tonight. Well, if it's clear. It hasn't been clear here in like 3 weeks, so. Also, I also wanted to say we are always looking for presenters, so if you can present something or you have any ideas for what you want to hear presented and know somebody that could present it, give them a shout out, give me a shout out. This is kind of a user-generated content program, so keep that in mind. A couple of other things. I've been getting a few comments from people. How do I get in? How do I see you guys live? And you might be already in and seeing this live, so you already know this, but there's some people watching us from YouTube, so I'm going to just go ahead and say it. If you follow us on Google+, you can RSVP and you'll get constant reminders of the session coming up. That way you can get into the stream where you can type into the Q&A. And I'm actually just activating the Q&A now. And of course the Q&A is where you can type in your questions so we can answer them on the fly. Otherwise, if you're watching us on YouTube most of the time, just subscribe to us and you'll get all of our latest stuff. But it's basically all I have, so I'm going to hand it right over to Josh, who's going to present on noise reduction in Photoshop.
Thanks, Adam. Can you see my screen, my Photoshop screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So tonight, instead of doing a PowerPoint presentation, I'm just going to kind of meander my way through a couple pictures and go through quite a few thoughts on noise reduction, and also hopefully it'll be somewhat interactive and people can both ask questions and or offer suggestions of how they do it. So I'll just start off, assuming maybe people don't know what noise reduction is or what the issue with noise is, and I'll start off with the image that I have open right now. Then I'll show you a couple other kinds of noise that I like to try and deal with noise reduction. So this is the picture of the Horsehead Nebula that I took last night. This is just the color data. It's the RGB, shoot from a red zone, so it's you know, a lot of light pollution, and there were some kind of nasty gradients to deal with. But the other thing is, wasn't enough data, and it wasn't dark enough to get really great data. So this picture right here was just my data combined, color calibrated, and then just pretty much a simple stretch and a little saturation. And so this is the point where I start thinking about getting ready to combine it with my luminance, or in this case, my hydrogen alpha. And the noise issue that I have with this, when you don't have enough data, is it's probably a little hard to see on the screen, and that might happen a few times tonight. You can always go back and watch it, and it comes up a lot clearer. But you get this kind of real nasty speckling and maybe a little bit of chromatic noise, different colors in there that you normally wouldn't want to see. And then especially when you get in the darker regions, there's just not a lot of detail, and it's kind of has to do with the old signal to noise ratio and how long it takes for your photons to pile up. So you're going to have more noise in your darker areas than you are in your lighter areas. So if you zoom out just a little bit, the red area here looks a little bit cleaner and looks nice, and come in on the horse head, and the dark area and the dark dust in here is just the details are pretty much non-existent. So this is one kind of noise that I want to talk about dealing with tonight. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a couple other images and just introduce a couple different kinds of noise, and then I will come back and deal with them in different ways. So I'm going to open up a picture of M13 that I worked on for a while. And this one has sort of a similar kind of noise, but it has to be dealt with differently. If I zoom in here, you can see sort of the same, real kind of rough grainy pattern. You can see that there's green cast to a lot of this, and there's not real defined edges to the stars. While it's a similar kind of noise, the way that you need to deal with this is going to be a lot different, because you have to be very careful to protect your stars whenever you're reducing the noise, especially in globular cluster like this. You really want to leave those stars alone, as they're all there is to the image. Another kind of noise that can be developed is modeling, which is really an aggravating kind of noise. And I can show you a little bit of that modeling here. This was working on tone map data for M27 in my hydrogen alpha, and an even worse case of the tone mapped modeling noise is here in my oxygen for M27. And you can see sort of what happens is that you do a lot of stretching after, in this case, running some high-pass filters and some noise reduction on the outside, and so you'll get these kind of real soft kind of globs and specks on the outside of the image. Adam, are those showing up? Can you see those okay?
We can see them pretty well, yeah.
Okay, so this one is a particularly hard one to deal with, and deal with this one probably more heavily handed than almost any other kind of noise that I deal with. So I just kind of wanted to get into some of the noises that I like to deal with, and now I'm going to go back and talk about how I deal with them in different ways. So we'll go back to the horse head to start off with. And the overall philosophy I have is that if you can get away without doing noise reduction at all, then that is ideal, because generally noise reduction is going to destroy your details, it's going to destroy your stars, it's going to oftentimes kind of mess with your colors, especially your detail colors. It might wipe the colors out of your small stars. There's all these nice little kind of yellow stars in here. So the overall answer, and the best answer for noise reduction, is just more data. Go to a darker site and get more data, and hopefully you wouldn't need any noise reduction then. So what I'm going to do is open up this hydrogen alpha data that I took, and this was from the same spot, and I think it was about 6 hours of data, and as you can see, this stuff is just buttery smooth. No noise reduction at all on this, and probably none is needed at all. So the best answer for this picture was essentially to use the hydrogen alpha as my luminance, and that acts sort of as the noise reduction. However, I wanted to get some more color out of this, and kind of a little more of the dust that Dylan was talking about, especially this brown dust around the horse head here, and some of these brown kind of stacks up on top of the horse head. And so need to stretch it a little bit more. And if it's already a little bit noisy, then it's going to get even worse whenever you start stretching it. So we've talked quite a few times about combining luminance or narrowband with RGB data, and I've grown more and more fond of the idea that your color data just does not have to be that perfectly clean, especially in stuff like nebula like this. It can be pretty blurred. Where you get almost all of your detail is going to be from your luminance or your narrowband, and so in that case, I think that I shot. Usually, I shoot about 3 times as much luminance or narrowband as I do color, and sometimes way more when I'm just trying to get a little bit of color stars into my image. But essentially, you're just using the color data to get color into it, and you can practically ignore the details and structure. Is kind of the way that I'm leaning more and more towards feeling about processing this stuff. So what I will do, if I'm at this stage, I'm just going to give it one more stretch here to kind of really bring this noise out so you can see what I'm talking about. What I'll do here is I'll do a couple different things. So I'm going to take you through how I sort of manually deal with this to start with, and then I'll go through and show you some of the tools and actions that are available in Photoshop that can actually make life a little easier for this stuff. So if I zoom way in here, you can see that not only am I getting some weird colors, I'm also getting basically what are like little speckles or kind of holes in the image. And this one is actually a pretty bright image, so you don't see those holes as much up top, but if I zoom in here down on the bottom where it's really dark, then you start seeing those speckles much worse. And those are pretty hard to deal with at that point. Once you start actually getting holes in your image, like these 2 little black holes, they don't want to go away typically. They're just kind of hard to get rid of completely. So so I kind of have my data probably about where I'd like it. I might just do a little bit of extra color adding to it at this point. Color saturation boost with match color just to get a little more in there before I start doing anything. So once I get to this point, what I usually do is create a new layer, and yes.
Alex has a question. If you've decided to discount the contribution of color, does it not follow that you can bin color to a higher level?
So I am mixed on that. I think that a lot of people have a lot of success with binning their color. I guess there's a bunch of different sides to it. One is if you're actually taking luminance or you're actually taking narrowband, then certainly it can become easier to bin your color and get away with it. Where I shoot from in my red zone, if I'm just doing broadband only, I don't use luminance. I just use the 3 color channels and then create a synthetic luminance. So I want to make sure that I'm actually retaining those details. The other issue I have is that, well, I usually don't do something like a 3 or 4 pixel blur. So while I'm discounting the importance of it for real good definition, I think that I get worried about my stars being too undersampled. So I always drizzle stack my data now because I'm typically shooting at 2 or 3 arc seconds per pixel, and it's hard if you're shooting that bin. It's really hard to recover round stars, even if your luminance or your narrowband data has good round stars. If your stars are really just a pixel big, or just plain square when they come off the camera, I personally have had a really hard time recovering it, and I haven't seen a good way to deal with that yet. So that's why I don't do it, at least with my setups. If I had a longer focal length telescope, or maybe a little better resolution with my setup, then I probably would much more seriously consider it. And I did consider it enough that I tried it, but had issues. Alex, do you do that?
I gotta wake up here. No, I'm not. I've been awake. I just have been muted. Well, I've got a problem. I went from a 1250 millimeter focal length with an f4.5 up to a FA 2450, and I just can't get enough data because it takes me 10, 15 minutes for a sub. And okay, so I can start binning those subs and start getting more exposures. But I've been trying to produce images with maybe 12 subs at best because that's all I can catch in a weekend. Um, and I'm thinking I gotta do something. I gotta make some compromises here. And I'm thinking one of the places I can compromise is to go ahead and bin. I know I lose resolution, but I'm shooting at 0.45 arc seconds per pixel in a sky that is on good days 1.5 arc seconds per pixel. So um, I think I've got a lot more. I got some room for binning there.
You have the 8300 sensor, right?
I got the 8300 sensor on a 2400 millimeter scope.
Have you tried binning the RGB on that?
I haven't had good enough skies to test it though. Last night was all windy, and Friday night was all windy. I've been trying this for about. I got this thing set up for about 3 months ago, and I've been trying it for 3 months, but I just haven't had consistently good skies, and I've been going 1 by 1 on the luminance and 2 by 2 on the RGB, and I'm thinking, it's just taking an awful long time to get a sub exposure, and I'm not getting enough of them to make a good picture.
Yeah, I mean, in your case, I would most likely bin. However, I mean, like I said, there's always drawbacks. One is that you're not really getting 4 times the signal noise ratio. The other one is the 8300 chip is known to have blooming issues. So, and I don't know if you would see them or not. I've talked to a lot of people who don't see them, but I've also talked to a lot of people who do see them.
Yeah, I haven't had blooming that I can see. I did get a weird reflection I posted in Cloudy Nights, but let's not take it away from your presentation. It was just your comment about how you've discounted getting really fussy about the color. And then I watched Adam Block do a presentation down at Nightfall, and he was sounding like he doesn't worry too much about the color either. And I've had this conversation with a few other people that they can buy with 2 or 3 subs in each color, and that's about it. That's all they need. And I'm thinking, well, if that's true, what about binning? Because I could save a lot of time with binning those shots up.
Yeah, a couple guys from Cloudy Nights have gotten into that. Richard Flynn especially has gotten into binning his oxygen and his S2 filter. And like I said, I guess it depends too on what's important to people. I'm not okay with having square stars, and I'm already on the hairy edge of having them if I don't drizzle. So I think it has to do with your focal length.
One of them, that's what your comment was. Now, if you had a really long focal length, well, I'm at 2450. That's long to me.
Right.
And particularly with that little camera, the camera may not be well matched to that particular scope, but that's the one I got. So if I want to take pictures, that's the one I got to use. Anyway, let's not take away from your presentation on doing the noise reduction.
Okay, so as I was stepping into this, okay, so I have my color stretched here. I both have it stretched and I have it saturated well. And I'm ready to start doing a little noise reduction on it. So I was talking about one of the issues when you start stretching it is that you start seeing little holes in your image. And the first thing that I'll do to try and work on taking care of that is if you go up to your filter and then go down to noise and then go down to despeckle. That runs a little action. It's not an action, I guess it's just a tool, and it actually does a pretty good job on its own of sort of cleaning things up. And sometimes I'll actually run a couple versions on new layers of that, and I don't know if you're able to see that on on this screen share or not. So I can come up here and try and show a different area to see if it shows up well or not for you. But that's a really powerful one, and it usually does a pretty good job of kind of cleaning out some of those holes. If the holes start getting too big, then there's not a lot you can do to it to bring them back. But the despeckle is good if those holes are kind of small in structure size, and it can take care of them. So then the other thing that I'll usually do is I'll actually run a slight Gaussian blur on the image. And this is part of the reason that I did a saturation boost right before I went to my noise reduction, because as soon as you run that Gaussian blur, you're going to lose a little bit of your color in your stars. You're going to lose just a little bit of color overall. And so I try and take care of that both on the front end and the back end by adding a little bit of color saturation before I run this. So same thing if you go up to filter and then go down to blur, go to Gaussian blur. The size that you want to run really depends on kind of your scale and what kind of structures you have in there. But if you look at this little box here, I have this zoomed in. I guess it's probably on a red area. I'll bring it over here. And you can see this is that noise that is just can get really bad in your RGB, especially if you try and push it. I'm always trying to push my data. I don't ever like to push it further than I should or further than it can handle, but I like to get the very most I can out of it. And so if you're going to do that, especially with your color data, and if you're not shooting under dark skies, you're going to get this little effect in here, and you can see it's just like pixelated color basically. And if you use a noise reduction routine, most of them aren't very good at dealing with this, and they'll give you kind of a real blotchy look. Different noise reduction tools will give you a blotchy look. And so I found that I really like to use these Gaussian blurs instead. As you grow that, you can actually start getting rid of that little speckled look. And so, I mean, you can go all the way up to something pretty high, like a 6 or 7 pixel Gaussian blur, which in my case is still probably not going too far on this. And I could even go a little bit further just to show you the power of this. And I could go up to like a 10 pixel blur here. So I just did a 10 pixel Gaussian blur, and you can see one of the things that happens is you lose your color in your stars, but you also really smooth everything out. So very quickly I can kind of just pop that back and forth. So if I do that, that's probably a little more extreme than I would normally do. So let me step back here and do something that's a little closer to what I would normally do, which is usually about probably between 1.5 to 3 pixel Gaussian blur in this case. I might go just a little bit higher on this because this data is a little bit rough, so I might go up to like 3.5 or 4 pixels here. And so that'll do a pretty good job of retaining the star color in here, and it gets rid of a decent bit of those pixels, enough that a good loom or HA layer can actually basically make them go away. But so I still lost a good bit of my star color. So like I said, on the back end, I like to come back in and deal with this again. And so I'm going to make a new layer. And the way that I usually make my new layers is that I go up to Select All, Edit, and Copy Merged, and then paste the new layer on. So that basically takes everything below it and copies it into one new picture above. So so now I have this new layer that I'm going to work with, and I want to put a little bit more color back into my stars. So I am not only going to create this new layer, but I'm going to come in here and make a mask that is basically that same picture, just pasted in into the luminance. And the reason I'm doing this is that I want to get color back into the stars, but I don't want to introduce a lot more color back into the background of the image, which is what I just actually cleaned up a good bit. So as is the case with all masks, your white will reveal that layer and your black will hide that layer. So as you can see, the stars stick out pretty well here. So usually when I do this, I'll actually increase the brightness a little bit, and I will increase the contrast a lot. And what that does is it makes the stars stand out even more and darkens the background. And then usually I'll even do a levels, which you can find under Image, Adjustment, and then Levels, or you can hit Control-L. and I will actually bring the black point slider in even further. And then that way my stars really stand out and pop out. And you can see that there's still a little bit in here that's going to get revealed because there's still a little bit of light area in here. And this still has a speckle pattern. So I don't want it to have a speckle pattern if I'm going to bring increased color saturation back into the stars. I could make a more meticulous star mask, but I don't actually mind bringing a little bit more color into this area either. However, the way that I get rid of this speckle pattern is what I just did on the previous image, and that's with a Gaussian blur. But I'm not going to do that just yet, because if I make a Gaussian blur, it's going to smear out my tiny little stars, and I care probably more about returning color to those stars than I do even the bigger stars. So to make sure that I'm actually getting color into these little stars, I'm going to run a minimum filter, or at this point a maximum filter. And this is actually going to basically take those star profiles and make them just a little bit bigger. So if you come up to Filter, Other, and then Maximum, you can see what happens here is that the stars just basically pop up in size a little bit. So I'll usually run this between 2 and 3 pixels. And clicking the preview on and off, you can see that it just grows the stars. And then after I grow the stars, then I can come back in here and I can do a little Gaussian blur on my mask. And the Gaussian blur on my mask is going to keep, like I said, keep me from getting this speckled effect back into the nebulosity that I just cleaned up. And since I made the stars bigger, even though I'm doing a Gaussian blur, the little stars are not disappearing in there. So I'll come back up here and I will do a match color is usually the way that I like to keep boosting my saturation as I work. So if you come up to Image, Adjustments, and then Match Color, I can bring that up to like maybe 140 or 150. And that'll bring some of those yellows and soft blues back into my stars. There we go.
Josh Hytham is asking, have you tried using PI with binarize selected to create your mask and copy it into your mask in Photoshop?
I have worked on that. Actually, I did that quite a while ago with David, where we were asking if there was a way to take a pixel that has a value and either turn it white or black if it was above a certain threshold. So I have done that on really challenging star fields, but I don't typically do that in these images. I haven't actually had a ton of really difficult star fields recently, so it's probably something that I would go back and explore. However, I guess for the purpose of tonight of doing the noise reduction in just Photoshop, it maybe probably isn't very helpful. But yes, I have looked at that some, and I've had mixed success. It's probably only because I haven't committed to doing enough with it yet. Does he have another comment or suggestion on how to use that?
I think that's it for now. We could discuss this afterwards. We'll probably have some time, unless he has something right now, because we'll probably open it up later for discussion, I'm sure. He's good.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, good deal. So now I feel like I'm actually pretty much ready to get this image combined with my Loom. So I was able to really boost the color saturation on it to a point where I'm really happy with it. I still have good star colors, but the data, the background noise in it is now much more manageable. It's a lot smoother, and it's going to combine with my hydrogen alpha quite a bit better. So now if I take my hydrogen alpha and just copy that picture and bring it over here into my color image and use it as a luminance channel or luminosity channel, and I usually bring that in as, so this is a two-step thing that I usually do, but I'll usually bring that in at about 35 to 40%. And you can see that really cleans it up. It's still got all these good colors that we just worked on, these yellow stars. The background is really quite smooth now without that kind of hard pixelated looking color. But the one thing that tends to happen whenever you bring the luminosity in like this is it does wash out the colors a little bit. especially the brighter kind of reds, it turns them really pink, and it'll turn this background dust that should be kind of a little darker brown to a really light brown. So what I also like to do is do this in lab mode. So I will duplicate this image, and I'm just going to call it a lab mode image. And then once you have the duplicate layer, or the duplicate image here, I'm going to delete that luminance layer that I just used, or HA layer that I just used. I'm going to turn this into a lab mode by going up to Image, Mode, come over to Lab Mode, and it will ask you if you want to flatten it, and that's fine. And let me copy this hydrogen alpha one more time, and I will come over to my lab mode. I will go to Channels, and then the way the channels work is a little bit tricky, but essentially you want to click on the lightness channel, but so that you can see what you're going to do, you want to come over here and click on this little box for the eyeballs, so that way you can actually see the image as you're working on it, but you're only working on the lightness channel. So now I'm going to actually paste over that lightness channel, and that's going to give me just a little bit darker image, typically in lab mode, than it is whenever I'm working in the regular RGB mode. So then I want to bring this back over and blend it in with the original image I was working on. To do that, you need to click up here on the lab channel to make sure you have them all selected, and then I will copy that. And then I'll bring that over to my original image. I'll paste that in also at about a 35 to 40%. And so really, once you have that color, kind of blurred, as you saw, I put a pretty big blur on it and really did what looked like destroying a lot of data, but it was able to let me get a lot of color into it without noise that you couldn't recover from. I was able just kind of with 2 fell swoops there to really clean everything up quite a bit. So that's how I typically manually bring the noise down on these images, and I'm going to stop and see if there's any other questions, but after that I'm going to show a couple of different tools that are in Photoshop and actions, and then we can go over and work on one other technique I have for M27. Adam, are there any other questions right now?
I don't see any questions in the room immediately, but I do want to remind the people out there on the stream that you can type your questions into the Q&A app. I think hover over the top right or click a button on the top right and you'll get there.
Okay, so let's say that we have much noisier HA data. So what I'm going to do is delete these 2 layers that I just brought in. And I'm going to go back to this kind of dirty color data that I have here. I'm going to take my HA data that I have that's really clean, and I can just throw probably like a high pass filter on it to really kind of put a lot of noise into it. Actually, what I'm going to do is just throw 2 high pass filters. And so this is something that you might run into if you're really trying to push your data a lot and get the most out of it. You might generate quite a bit of noise on here. I like to usually keep my luminance or hydrogen alpha alone, but if you're really trying to increase the contrast, you might go through and do a couple different high pass filters, and the high pass filters will very quickly kind of really add a lot of chunkiness to your data. And you can see here that there's a lot more chunkiness. There's kind of some modeling in here. If you look down in this dark region, there's much more noise down in here now. So we can call this sort of an image that you actually have to deal with noise on when you're mixing in your luminance or your hydrogen alpha. So if I want to bring this over, I can do the same thing and bring this over the same way that I did before. Oh, hold on 1 second here, sorry. And so I'm going to bring this in as a luminosity layer. And then I'll do the same thing with bringing in a lab mode, an additional lab mode layer. by duplicating this. And so now this one looks pretty cool because there's a little more contrast in here, but I pushed the hydrogen alpha quite a bit further, so the image is not nearly as clean. So once I combine these, I can't fall back on my luminance or my hydrogen alpha to do an actual good, take care of the noise in the background. So this is where sometimes I might fall back on some of the actions that exist. So I'm going to flatten this image right now so that I can start playing with some of these actions.
Josh, Tolga is asking what lab mode is.
I don't know that I can give him a great technical answer. If some, go ahead.
It's a way to split out the luminance and chrominance. The L is essentially the luminance data, and A and B represent different aspects of the chrominance information. It's just a different way of manipulating the detail and color information in an image.
So, yeah, to answer what David said, sometimes you might come in here and choose a channel to kind of work on your red saturation. So you can come in, I'll just kind of go on a quick tangent on this to answer your question, but you can go into the A channel in your lab mode and you can change the contrast to change the color in the red. And so if I boost this contrast up, it'll give me kind of nice deep red here. And then I can come down to the B channel and that could work on the blue a little bit. And if I increase that contrast, that'll give me a lot richer blue in the different regions. And then you can also work on the brightness of those two channels to actually sort of change the tone of it. So by bringing that brightness down, I can it kind of cools the whole picture down to a blue. If I bring it up, it'll bring it over to green, and that's up in the B channel. So I'll spend a lot of time actually in lab mode actually working on increasing saturation very selectively in stars because it's good at bringing out the blue stars and the yellow stars, and sometimes good at working on changing the red colors in your nebulosity if you want to kind of tweak the red a little bit in there. Does that answer it, Tolga?
Yeah, I'll just add that channels tab that is opened up right there. If you were in RGB mode, it would have an R, a G, and a B. So basically going right back to what David said, it's just a different way of displaying it. Yep, there you go. So you see, that's what we typically see. So then you switch over to lab mode, and it separates the luminance channel for you. So having worked in PI a lot kind of makes sense why you want to split the luminance. So that's just the way to do it in Photoshop.
Right, yeah, I mean in Photoshop, either in lab mode or typically you might just have two images open all the time, or work separately kind of as you see through the RGB and then the luminance. And that's probably why I do that in PixInsight still, is I'm so used to doing that in Photoshop where I'll work in my, I will work in the RGB separate from the luminance or the different narrowband channels separate all the way through an image. So
could I throw something in here just to help explain what LAB is? L stands for lightness, and the A, I think, is the range along the line from green to magenta, while the B is along the lines from blue to yellow or something like that. You can look it up in Wikipedia or something, but it's just a different way of manipulating, of controlling the different. Instead of having three colors, you've got two color ranges that you can go back and forth on, and that gives you all the colors of the rainbow. That's it.
Okay, so it instead of just working on the RGB channel, you're separating the luminance out of it, also the lightness and the luminance channel out of it, also with the lab mode.
Yeah, in general, this isn't the place maybe to go into all of the color models because I'm not sure any of us are prepared to give an oral report on that right now.
Well, but I'm
yeah, but
we're talking about it.
Just think of it. Yes, lightness is separated, and we all understand that. Then you go green to magenta is one range of colors, and blue to yellow is another range of colors. And by going back and forth across these ranges at different levels, you can eventually represent all the colors in the spectrum.
Got it.
There, to show what he was talking about, sliding this brightness slider from the bottom all the way to the top. I think we're getting a weird echo from somebody. But if you slide the brightness slider from the bottom all the way to the top, you go from your green to your magenta on the A channel. And then if you were to do the same thing on the B channel, you'll see that you can go all the way from the blue up into the, I don't know what, I can't remember what Alex said it was, the yellow. So cancel that, and I'll come back over here and get into using these actions. So the actions and the tools. The one thing that happens that I did not cover is that when you're really stretching your color, a lot of times you're also going to get a little bit of a nasty green look to your image. Both either in some of your blue stars may turn green, or even your background might turn a little bit green. You can see this here, this kind of little green cast. I never do this manually just because the two tools, one in PixInsight and one in Photoshop, work so well, and they both come with the programs, or HLVG in this case is free, although a donation is always nice. It just works perfect every time. Asta, La Vista Green. If you don't have it, you should get it. It's the best way to deal with green noise, and it works pretty much as easy as a click of a button, just like that. So you can see the green disappeared and turned into blue. So I'm still going to wait to run that until just a little bit later. Now that I have this image flattened, I want to show you a couple of the other different actions that I like to use. I have in here, if I come down to my filter, I have both the HLVG under Deep Sky Colors, and then Picture Code is Noise Ninja's action for smoothing things out. So I'll talk briefly sort of what I like about these different actions and how I like to use them. So Noise Ninja is great at, to me, reducing small scale noise. If you have any kind of larger scale noise that isn't really fine and grainy, it can get very lumpy and plasticky looking in a hurry. The other thing that Noise Ninja does that I don't like is it always destroys my stars. So as I drag around the image here, you can see that it's doing a pretty good job of getting rid of this fine grained noise, but it also destroys every small star in here. It kind of gives it that like dreaded diamond look. And here we're in a region where there's not a fine grainy noise, and there's kind of clumpy noise, and as soon as you start trying to reduce that with Noise Ninja, it does not work very well. But what I'll do is I'll run it here, and I can show you sort of what it does. And if I run Noise Ninja without fail every time, I'm going to run a inverted star mask, and I'll show you how to do that. But let me actually run Noise Ninja on a new layer so I can click it on and off for you. Okay. I'm going to close these other ones out so the computer runs fast. So this is Noise Ninja, and you can see there is actually some pretty decent details in the horse head before you actually run the Noise Ninja on it. And you can see that's the other thing that it does, that it kind of destroys that fine dust structure, which you really want to protect. So to do the inverted mask, I'm going to select the entire image before I ran Noise Ninja. Same thing, select all, edit, copy, merged, and then I'm going to create a layer mask by pressing this button down here, and then alt-click on the empty screen. And then I'm going to paste my image in here, and I want to invert it. So I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, Invert. And as we said before, the white reveals and the black conceals. So the black is actually going to conceal Noise Ninja from running the noise reduction on the stars themselves. And the other good thing is that it's going to keep Noise Ninja from doing too much to the bright areas. So this area in here is really bright and has great detail. And I don't want to destroy it. So this mask, as you can see, it gets a little bit darker in the bright areas because it's an inverted mask. In fact, I like that area so much that what I'm going to do is stretch my mask a little bit more. So I'm going to click on the mask, and usually I actually like to work being able to see my image but working on the mask. So you can alt-click on that picture to see the mask if you want to work on it that way. So if you want to work on your curves, you can actually see what they're doing. But I don't really care that much what they're doing. I care how they're impacting the image. So I will click on it, not all click on it, but just click on that image, and then I will work on that image while I see how it's affecting my actual image. So what I'm going to do is actually darken that mask up some, because what that's going to do is it's going to increase the size of my stars, and it's also going to darken the mask over this stuff right here. So I can show you that real quick, and then I'll show you how it impacts the actual image. So by just doing this curve here, it darkens the brighter areas in the mask, and then talking inversely here, it makes the brighter areas of the real image darker in the mask, and it makes the stars bigger. So if I preview this on and off, you can see the stars grow and the bright area gets darker. So okay, I'm actually pretty happy with how much that did there. And then I actually want to run a little blur on this yet again. I almost always run a little bit of a blur on my mask, usually 2 or 3 pixels, just because I don't want it affecting things with a hard edge. And you can see now that I ran the Noise Ninja and have this mask on here, it's not really changing much in this area, except for over here in the horse head. It protected a little bit of that. If I come into the darker area, though, you should see that it makes a pretty good difference. And you can right there. If I click it on and off, it really smooths everything up very nicely. So those inverse masks with any of these actions are really great. And Noise Ninja especially wants that inverse mask. And to be honest, I actually probably never really run Noise Ninja at anything more than 40, maybe 30%, somewhere in there, because it runs pretty strong. There are options in it to really impact what it does. So if you open it up, I'll just walk through it very briefly, but if you come to the filter, you can work on the strength, the smoothness, the contrast, unsharp mask amount, and radius on here. So there's a lot in here. There's noise brushes. I mean, you can spend forever exploring in here, but really, I just use it the way that I just showed you, because I like to do really minimal and kind of just knock out some of that fine scale noise in there. So that's a pretty easy one to use. So now let's go on to yet another tool in here that I really like. Both of these are very effective noise reduction tools when they're used properly. And so there's space noise reduction, and then there's deep space noise reduction. And these are both actions in the astronomy tools. Space noise reduction works really well on sort of brighter stuff, and kind of do it the same way where I'll run it, and then after I run it, I'm going to lower the opacity of it, and I'm going to use my own masks alongside with it. So let me delete my Noise Ninja layer here. But you can see that this one doesn't have too much of an impact on the bright area. It does it's kind of a subtle noise reduction on the bright areas, which is why I really like it, because I don't feel like I have to run too strong of a mask. But it doesn't do a phenomenal job in these dark areas. It kind of still leaves it pretty blotchy down here. So when I run these actions, I actually usually run both of them together. So I will run the space noise reduction, and then I will actually create another layer where I'm going to run the deep space noise reduction. And so that way I can deal with both the brighter areas and the darker areas. So you'll see what I'm going to do is make a combination of masks and put these guys in a folder to actually impact everything all at once. So the deep space noise reduction, if I come down here into the darker area, does a much better job at smoothing out the darker areas for me. Click this off, and you can see it goes from quite a bit of noise down there to pretty clean. So for the space noise reduction, I like to put in a mask that reveals the light areas like this. And I usually keep that just about as it is. And then for the deep space noise reduction, I like to put in a mask that reveals the dark areas. So I'll put that in here like that. And then I will invert this one so that I'm revealing the dark areas. You can see this is the area down here that we cared about that was dark. So I'll do that kind of little gentle curve on it once again. And so that's going to reveal this area down here. And then the thing I like to do is put both of these guys into a folder, lower the opacity just a little bit so that I'm actually running everything kind of somewhat subtly. So the masks themselves are going to take care of just a little bit of lowering the opacity essentially of the layer, and then putting them into a folder together and bring this opacity slider down is going to bring it down even more. So that way I'm actually probably still only running them at about 30 or 40%. And you might sometimes want to have that opacity be a little higher and impact one of the areas more than the other. So you can change the opacity of the lighter, the deep space noise reduction or the space noise reduction on their own. When you get into doing these, I'll have usually maybe 20 folders by the time I'm done. It's a good idea probably to actually label these layers as you're working on them. So you could come in here and say this is my space noise reduction layer, and then the next one might be my deep space noise reduction layer. And it just helps you when you're looking back here to actually remember what you're working on. So there wasn't too much noise in my light area on this image, but there's quite a bit on the dark area. So I might turn down the regular space noise reduction quite a bit, but keep the deep space noise reduction up a little bit higher here. And you don't want any of them to be at 100% opacity, otherwise nothing's going to actually shine through on the layers. So that is how I typically use those two. And you can see that what was pretty chunky from that hydrogen alpha that we actually created, that we put noise into, it's back to being just a very, very smooth image, but it does not have a plasticky look to it anywhere, which is something that I definitely try and avoid.
Josh,
go ahead.
Josh, would you mind zooming in on like below the horsehead region and just let the kind of lag catch up, just so we could see some of the noise, and then maybe deactivate it?
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, the little bit of lag makes it hard for us to see, but yeah, I'm kind of intrigued by that. I never thought of using them both with the masks inverted, or one inverted. Never thought of that before, and I'm kind of excited to try that.
It's cool because it gives you a lot of control. I mean, even and then once you're done, you know, I'm running through this very fast right now, but usually what I would do is keep the folder at 100%, and then I would just tweak these two layers to a little more than what I want. So if I'm looking at this, you know, I might slide it all the way up and down to see what I want them to be relative to each other. And then I would come back in and work on the actual folder itself. But yeah, it's useful. It gives subtle steps. So sometimes I may even go through and kind of attack different size structures or different regions, because sometimes I may want to focus on something very specific, like the horse itself and these little clumps in the dust right here, whereas a lot of the other rest of the image does not have much fine structure in it, and so that one I might be able to use a lot broader move on, whereas these guys I might really want to pay special attention to. So at this point I would be pretty happy with where I'm at. I'd probably, to continue kind of just finishing the different noise issues, I would probably, now that I'm near the end, run this HLVG. So usually I'll run HLVG kind of at the beginning and the end of my processing. So as soon as I get my colors combined, I'll probably run it, and then sometimes I'll run it in the middle as well, because the green tends to creep in when you're working on this brown dust, and I don't want it to get too strong. But and I typically won't run it all the way at 100% either. I'll usually run it at about 50% opacity, or in PixInsight what would be 0.5. So the one other thing that happens sometimes when you're doing these different noise reductions, and it's hard to catch everything with your masking and when you're stretching, you can let things actually get a little out of hand, is that you'll destroy some of the details in your very quick contrast areas. And I'll give Hytham props on this one because I actually had not used this one much at all. I think it maybe had been a year since I used it before, and then he brought up trying to use this again. But especially down in this flame region, you've got this really bright stuff, and then right behind it you've got this really dark stuff. And while you're stretching and using all your noise reduction, it's easy to lose those details. So I'm going to make another layer, and to come back in here and work on this, go to Image, Adjustments, and Shadows and Highlights. And I don't want to work on the shadows at all, but on the highlights, especially in this bright area, I want to bring a little bit more of that structure back in that I lost in my noise reduction. So you can see, you just start creeping that percentage amount up, and you instantly bring back tons of detail, and it's really powerful. And you could go crazy with it and bring all kinds of stuff back into it. And I'd like to be a little more subtle than that, because I think once I start going that high up, around 60%, I'm starting to introduce a little bit in the way of artifacts, but I might come up to like 40%, somewhere around there. And then you can start working on the radius. With the larger radius, you're not going to get as much of those fine details, so you might bring that down just a little bit. And I'll usually run that anywhere between 5, 10, 15, depending on the scale of my image. And there's still just a little bit going on with these dark shadows that I'd like to bring in, so I might just bring this shadows up just a tiny bit in there, and maybe even just like 5% to bring back just a little bit of the details in there. And so this tool almost feels magical, and so I don't want what this did to the rest of the image. You can see how the rest of the image, it kind of really hammered that red nebulosity and hammered the brown dust, and just kind of really change the overall appearance of it, which I don't want to do, but I do want to bring back this flame nebula. So I might just mask this flame nebula out and only work on that for this little thing I did right here. So I might just feather that and give myself a pretty generous feathered mask of 75. And
excuse me, Hytham is commenting, quick FYI, it can also be used to control the brightest stars in the image as well. It's the HDR-MT equivalent.
Yes, I've been living in that tool for the last couple of weeks. It's very powerful. I think maybe even Mike Miller was talking about that not too long ago. But it's almost magical. It can almost like bring back stuff that you thought you had lost in an image. So I mean, you can just see. I'll zoom in and out here on this for you and kind of let the lag catch up on it. But you can see what it looks like now. And then when I click on there, you can see how much detail was actually lost that sometimes just slips through the cracks and you don't notice. And so back off and then back on. So working with all this noise reduction, it's important to know how far to go with everything, when to stop with stuff, and everything in between. And the idea is, I think when you're really doing it right, is it doesn't look like you used any noise reduction at all in the picture, but you don't see much noise, which is what I typically shoot for. I think it's hard for a lot of us who image from red zones or don't get enough time into our images, but I was pretty happy with the way this one came out, where it's got almost this super fine grain like film noise that you almost have to be looking for, but there's no blotchiness at all in this image. The only noise that I had a little trouble dealing with was, Adam helped point out, was there's a little bit of color noise down here in the bottom. And so sometimes I may even come in here if you get a little color noise that you can't deal with very well, and actually mask that off, this really dark region, and desaturate it. I won't go through and do that now, but it would be sort of the same step as when you're using that deep space noise reduction. Actually, I could do that very quickly. So I'll just go through here, create a new layer, and then we're going to paste that layer into this image again and invert it, just like we did with the deep space noise reduction layer. So I don't want this saturation tool touching almost anything at all except for the very, very darkest part of the image. I definitely don't want it touching the stars because I worked very hard to get color back in my stars, but I really want it to just really touch that layer. So if I just keep adding curves to this over and over, what I'm going to do is stretch the whole image, and all that's going to be left is that area that's got really this kind of really nasty noise down in this region here. And you know, you can go in and just actually feather it off, but I like doing it this way instead of actually selecting it with a lasso because I'm not very good at catching everything all the time, and this makes me, typically I know if something's really dark then it's probably still going to have a little chromatic noise if I found it somewhere else because I tend to work pretty globally on my images. But the reason I keep stretching these curves, you're going to notice that I'm actually clipping the black point, which is fine. I want to clip the black point because now what I want to do is actually stretch this back up a little bit and brighten up this dark region. So I probably didn't even clip it quite enough, so I'm going to take one more stretch on here. Maybe even one more I could get away with, but I want to make sure that I'm really keeping the rest of the image completely black and I can't recover any information from it except for these really dark areas. And so that's, you can see, not the middle of the image in here is not actually increasing in lightness now that I'm working on bringing this lightness back. So so I've got these areas kind of revealed. I still need to make it a little bit brighter, so I'll come into my image adjustments, brightness. I'll increase the brightness just to get those couple little areas a little bit brighter. And I'm going to put a little bit of a Gaussian blur on this as I do with all the masks, like I said. And then I'm going to desaturate these little areas right in here. So I've got my mask set up. I select my picture. I'm going to go over to Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, and I can specifically see that there's some nasty blue chrominance noise in here. So I'm going to bring down my saturation some, which takes care of some of it. And then I'm going to specifically go after the blue because I can see that's what's really causing me issues down here. And so if I bring that blue down here, I can bring that way down. You can see what's happening is that I'm not losing anything in my stars here. These blue stars are remaining blue, these stars are remaining blue, but there's kind of a real nasty noise down there that's just pretty much completely gone away. As in here, the color that is left is actual signal instead of chrominance noise down there. So a lot of different ways to deal with that chrominance noise, but that's one way that I kind of like to work on it. So that would put me in a place where I was pretty happy with where the image ended up. All of it would take a little longer, and I'd take a little more time going through that, but it shows some of the actions I use, and it shows kind of how I might manually do a lot of my noise reduction. Adam, I know that we are out of time. Should I still step through some of the other stuff, or do we want to just see if there's questions?
If you want to, I would keep going. We'll push it over a little bit. I have some notes for follow-up questions. Guys out there, throw in your questions now, so that if we do have an abrupt end, at least you got them in. You could go a little bit longer, and maybe another 15 minutes, and we'll bring it into the room.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll show 2 tricks on other images that I like to do, and these ones feel to me a little bit more like they push the boundaries of kind of what processing is or should be, but they tend to be particularly helpful for me. So another way that I might actually deal with nasty chrominance noise is that you'll see a little bit of noise in here in this M13 image, and especially if I just do a little bit of a stretch there, you can see that it turns green in a hurry, but not only is it green, it has a little bit of kind of nasty blue stuff in here and stuff like that too. And I struggled with this. I tried desaturating this a lot, I've had issues with desaturating star fields like this and still maintaining the good colors. I mean, I love where the colors are in the actual cluster here. I think really rich yellows and blues and a little bit of kind of orange almost in the stars, which I'm really happy with, and I don't want to lose that. But so sometimes what I'll do is I will actually get rid of the color in the image by just throwing it all out. So I would come in here and go image, mode, and go down to grayscale. So I don't want to because I already have the grayscale image next door here for you. But I will come over to my grayscale image here, and what I need to do is actually turn this grayscale image back into a color image, because I'm going to bring this in and I'm going to actually put it back into this picture here that has this kind of nasty color noise that I'm having a hard time getting rid of. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, is that what I want to do is get the black background that I got rid of the noise to completely replace my background of the other image. So there's two ways that I deal with it. One is that I can just paste this on here, and then I can actually paste an inverted image like we just did there. And pasting down here and select this. So this is sort of almost exactly like what we were doing before, where I want to only let the background show through, but not touch the stars at all. So I might do the same thing here a little bit. This works especially well on things like clusters or galaxies that are kind of sitting on their own in space. You can mask off kind of the stars a lot easier in this case than you can the nebulosity. And so I can work on this mask while I'm watching my actual image here, kind of like I said I like to do. As you can see, I brought in, I really did not lose any color in my star field here at all, but I got a lot more pop because I was able to get the background to be kind of a nice richer black, or well, not a black, but a gray. I think if I look at the histogram here, I think that we're still not clipping anything. So if I come to the color sampler tool, yeah, we're not clipping anything anywhere here. So we're still good to go. So I'll just click this back and forth one more time for you. You can kind of see the green nasty noise and speckle of blue and red in the background, and now you can see that it's all black. So this was particularly helpful for me when I used to image more with one-shot color and DSLRs, because those ones really tend to want to develop a lot of noise as you stretch them, and maybe even quicker and more so than the CCD cameras. I still do this once in a while when I'm imaging with galaxies or imaging clusters like this, just to get kind of a cleaner background. So that's one trick I have with getting rid of that chrominance noise.
Josh, Dylan
yes.
Asking, let's see, planetary CMOS imagers may also appreciate the banding removal and topaz noise reduction. Do we know of any other tools that might remove banding style noise as CMOS cameras become more popular?
So, well, in Photoshop, you can see right here that Astronomy Tools has two. They're right under the other noise reductions. There's horizontal banding noise and vertical. What is a vertical banding noise reduction? I actually found those to work pretty well, to be honest, whenever I had issues with them. Now, the guys who are doing that really need to make sure that they understand that they're vertical or horizontal and not walking noise. It never really worked very well in walking noise, and to be honest, so when I talk about walking noise, I'm talking about the noise that happens when you don't dither enough with your DSLR and you get this kind of correlated diagonal streaky noise pattern, and that's just very difficult to remove properly without really destroying your image. It was, to be honest, was even with good dithering, unless you got tons and tons of time, it was hard to really get away from that when you really stretch the heck out of an image. However, the vertical banding and the horizontal banding noise reduction both worked quite well. I don't think I have any samples on my computer, but there was a while where we were having issues with our QSIs having some vertical banding in them, and that tool actually did a pretty good job of removing the vertical banding noise. And to, I guess, help people understand kind of what it is, it was just basically tall columns growing across a lot of the image that kind of just had very slight shifts in their pixel values, but they were, when they start off, they may only be 1 or 2 ADUs different in value, so they're not visible in your raw frame. But then whenever you start stretching it all, you're stretching everything, so those 1 to 2 ADUs may come up to be 20 or 30 ADUs by the time that you finish your stretching. And when you do that, then they're very visible, and they have to be dealt with. Otherwise, your image does not come out all right. The other thing that I've done before is essentially create a synthetic flat. I worked through it. It's probably in PixInsight, it might take 10 minutes to go through and do. Photoshop would probably take me even a little bit longer, but essentially you would want to go through and tone map your data and clone out all of your issues, and then divide that frame by your initial frame to actually get rid of those vertical bandings in your background. It's probably a little more complex and definitely worth kind of a mini tutorial on its own to do that. But you can do the same thing in PixInsight, and I think it typically works more effectively in PixInsight. However, these tools work really well on their own too, and I think that they actually do something somewhat similar. Although I don't know that the math is exactly the same behind how they work. Although I think they do the division. Maybe David could comment on that.
Sorry, Josh, I missed part of that. What was that you wanted me to comment on?
I was just wondering if the horizontal and vertical banding noise reduction tools or actions and astronomy tools work the same way as the synthetic flats that we were doing to get rid of the banding.
Right. That's a good question. I'm not sure if they work the same way or not.
Yeah, so that's something we could look into, but they both essentially end up doing the same thing. I don't know if they take the same path to get there. So hopefully that answers Dylan's question. Since I'm not hearing anything, I will go on to...
Yes, it does.
Okay, excellent. The one last thing that I want to touch on is the really faint dust and how I kind of like to deal with that. So sometimes there's really faint dust that has almost no structure at all in it and is going to be really noisy. So it's almost like you would need 1,000,000 hours to get this stuff to come out perfectly clean, but there is no structure in it, and so you can take a little bit of a shortcut sometimes to get yourself there. It feels to me a little bit like pushing it on how far you go, but the outer halo of M27 is a really good example to me of that faint dust. And sometimes the IFN and like M81 or M82 or some of the other IFN that really just has very little structure. M27 actually has some structure in it, maybe even more than the IFN, but it's kind of a good region to show you what I'm talking about. This is my data that was in progress that I was working on, and I'll open up where I end up getting with it. So I try to tone map these pictures for stuff like this because I like doing the bicolor images, or I like doing the starless images. And what I want to end up with is just like a really clean thing that does not show a lot of remnants of the star removal process. So if I open up, let me close some of these other ones out so I don't get lost here. There we go. If I open up this O3 picture where I was partway through tone mapping, this looks pretty good, but there's still kind of a lot of nasty star remnants in here. But I also know that there's almost no structure at all in this area of the halo, and I also know where that halo is because I stretched it. So it's real data, it's really there, and you're not making anything up. But this is where I was saying that sometimes you might get into pushing things a little bit. So I want to clean up these star halos in the background because I just want a pitch black backdrop here, because I'm going to bring my initial sky back in here whenever I'm done. So part of the tone mapping process, one of the tools that you can use is just a dust and scratches filter. So I'll show you just a dust and scratches filter. Kind of can get rid of some of that blobby noise, and this can work in a lot of different scenarios, this dust and scratches filter, if you can really properly mask it off right. So I'm going to run this here at, looks like as soon as I run it at about 17 or 18 pixels, I get rid of almost all that blobby noise in the background. So it does. Now, if I stretch it at all, and I'll stretch it just so you can see, it gets really nasty. So you can't really use that dust and scratches filter and then do much stretching after it. But this is just to clean up the background for me. So I'm going to run that, but I'm also going to put a mask on it to make sure that I'm actually only touching that background. And so I'm going to come in here, and this time I'm just going to feather this stuff out. Lasso it and then feather it out. So I want to make sure that I'm really only touching the background with that. So I'll put in probably like a 30 pixel radius feather here, and I'll select the inverse of that. And there we go. So this background got cleaned up in a hurry just by doing that. And if I want to bring in a star field now, this background is perfectly clean, and I could bring in a star field and just lighten the image, and it will sit right on top of this, data here, and just look perfectly clean. So that's a good way to get rid of these kind of artifacts from the back star field. And once you get that new star field up on top of this image, then you're not going to get those nasty kind of moiré patterns when you actually stretch the image that I was just showing you. So again, like I said, you have to be careful with this tool. You can't plan on stretching much after you use it, otherwise you can see you get some really nasty stuff in the background. But so we just got rid of all those nasty stars, and then we still have just a couple stars left in this data here. So there's a couple ways you can deal with it. Since I really know there's no structure in here, in this point I probably would not feel too bad about coming in here and just blurring that data. So you can just throw a generous blur on this, because there really is no structure at all on that. I'm blurring my mask. And it's essentially just helping me get to what I was going to get to before too long anyways, because this halo that's how that halo appears in space, and you get there if you took more data, but I got there a little bit quicker because probably getting something that clean might take 100 hours of data in O3 to actually get it that clean. Like I said, I have mixed feelings on how okay that is. I think if we're just presenting art and trying to make something look good, I think it's okay in this circumstance to make that little move right there. Another thing that you can do is you can slowly use the content aware filter or the content aware stamp to actually get it there. So you take your clone stamp here. Let's just delete this layer, and I can make the same thing happen here. So I have my, not my clone stamp, I'm sorry. What do they call this tool? The spot healing tool. And make sure that it is in content aware. And you can make it grow larger and smaller by using your bracket keys, your left and right bracket keys. And usually I want it to be just a little bit bigger than the blotch is trying to remove. And you can see that actually smooths it out pretty well. So, you know, if you don't have too many of them, you can come in here and do this. I would never recommend it for like an entire star field or something like that, because then it would take all day. The other thing is, just like using the dust and scratches filter, you don't want to stretch after you do this, and I can show you why. So if you put a big blob in there like that, and you stretch it again afterwards, then that big blob just shows up. And it might be a little hard to see on that computer screen, but it shows up in that stretch, because basically it's, you know, you're kind of hiding the imperfections that it's going to cause down the road by doing this walled start. So that's a good way to go from something that would have been nice and looked pretty good, where you can see in here like this, to something that really becomes very smooth and very clean and ready to throw on top of the star field. So I guess that's the last of the manual tricks that I had planned for tonight to share, Adam. If there's no more questions, we can hop into whatever you had, or...
There are. I haven't seen any other questions out here. One just popped in from Eric. Have you tried hold on. Imagenomic Noiseware?
I have not tried Imagenomic Noiseware yet. Tell me about it, Eric.
I haven't really learned all those tricks of layering and inverting masks. And the Noiseware does a lot of those things, has a lot of controls in it, and allows you to get rid of noise fairly nicely and smooth things out. But before that, of course, I always, PixInsight, I always use Harry's little trick about doing a masked image and getting rid of noise.
I'm sure we'll have a PI noise reduction session before too long.
Well, so after what's the name of that tool? Oh.
ACDNR or no.
No.
TGV. I think
Atrius Wavelets.
Yeah.
So after Atrius Wavelets, and then you move it into Photoshop, then using Noiseware, that pretty well smooths things out. Although sometimes you do have to do a little bit of masking and kind of smooth out the background, but not as nicely as you explained tonight. I'll have to learn that, Josh.
Yeah, I use Imagenomic as well with masks.
Yes, that's absolutely true. You can use it with mask. You can mask off certain areas.
Yeah, but you can mask off the certain areas, but one of the things that I don't like about it is that it doesn't give you an accurate representation of what the masks would look like, or sorry, what the final image or the resultant image would look like with the masks applied. So it's a bit of a guessing game. So what you could do is, if you wanted to, you could apply nearly 75 to, say, even 100% of noise reduction to the image itself. But what you could do is, once you get back into Photoshop, you have the ability to then use the opacity layer to adjust the amount of noise that will be applied to the image itself, just to give you a nice live representation.
So I think the one thing that we'll drive towards here is, once we have a PixInsight noise reduction presentation, then we can do one where we'll do one together and we can show, because you know, a lot of these tools are tools that I used a lot before, and maybe to some extent now, but ultimately your best results are going to come from hopping back and forth between, or at least mine come from hopping back and forth from PixInsight to Photoshop.
Yeah, I personally don't use PixInsight anymore for noise reduction. I just use Photoshop with all the layers and masking, as very similar to what you do, Josh. My routine is nearly identical.
Yeah. Sometimes I do like to use PixInsight to actually create masks sometimes, especially star masks, because I've had better luck recently with separating stars in PixInsight from masks. But
Going back to one of the topics from earlier, tell me what the benefit of using a binarized mask would be.
Oh, so what it does is, so if you take a look at how masks are created in PixInsight, the strength of the mask itself on the objects that you are creating are going to be dependent upon the number of wavelet layers or planes that they are supported by. So the intensity of the mask of a given star, if it only exists, say, in the first 2 or 3 wavelet planes, is not going to have the same level of intensity of that of an image that might exist, say, across 6, 7, or 8. So what Binarize does is that it just converts it into a 0 or a 1. So it makes every single star that is found in that image is going to be brightened at the exact same intensity level regardless of the number of layers that it is supported by. So if I wanted to, so if you create different masks, right, and you say, well, I want to create a mask that is composed of 6 wavelet layers, wavelet planes, whatever it is that you want to call it, wavelet scales, if you take a look at the mask itself very carefully, you see some are very black, whereas others are going to be a light gray. Now, you can make adjustments to that after the fact, similar to what Josh has done here, and this is what I do. So if I carry it into Photoshop or PixInsight, you can then adjust the intensity of that mask by adjusting either the curves layer or the levels layer to make them that much darker or even lighter. With Binarize, they're all the same value across the board. And I just find it's a little bit easier that way, so that way I'm targeting, when I apply a given function against the image, then it is applied to each one of those stars in an equal manner. So of course, grayer or darker, it's going to be either less exposed or more exposed, and the greater, say, reduction, if you're using a morphological transformation, will have on that image itself. So
it's
Binarize makes it equal, and then if you leave it normally, it doesn't make it equal.
It's particularly useful for at least for me, for actually saturating stars to make sure that you have colors in them, or masking stars off when you're doing noise reduction, especially the small stars. Those are always the hardest ones, and what you hope to have is stars that are a little bit bigger than your noise, so that way if it binarizes and actually binarizes only stars and not little chunks of noise, and that's where a lot of the difficulty comes in. But you want it to fully, so on these range masks, a lot of times, that's why you have to work so much on the curves and the contrast and really mess around with that stuff, because you need to get those little stars in your mask to be completely white or black, and it takes some fiddling around to get them there, so that they actually work.
Right. Just to be clear, the what you're referring to is the Binarize function in the star mask generation, right, Hytham and Josh?
Yes. Yep. And the morphological transform. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, sorry, star mask. Oh my gosh, I said morphological. Sorry, my bad. Yes, star mask.
You're jumping ahead, combining with morphological transformation. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So basically, it's kind of a way to overcome a bit of kind of an inefficiency in creating a star mask with wavelets itself, right? So like you're able to, because if you did it with wavelets only, you're going to have the intensity issue if you're using it for color saturation in your stars.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, because the other thing is, because you can definitely create a star mask just by simply going into, so there's a million different ways you can create a star mask, right, within PixInsight. One of them is one that everyone is very familiar with by leveraging PixInsight, or you can end up using something like MMT and then disabling the residual layer, which will give you that mask as well. But of course, that is going to be limited based on the number of layers that you've selected previous to get the right amount of stars that are selected, because some are going to be weaker than others, whereas I personally find, and of course David, Josh, and anyone else in the channel may disagree or chime in and add to it, is that I find that Binarize gives me a much more accurate representation of, sorry, I shouldn't say much more accurate, but it allows me to apply or create an even mask across the board regardless of the size of those stars in the image.
Yeah, without the Binarize function, you basically get the flux of the star equals its brightness level, right? Exactly. So the fainter stars in the background give you a fainter, mask for that star, right? So it will be affected less whenever you go to it. The Binarize function basically says this is a 1 or a 0. It's essentially a round function. So anything above 0.5 becomes 1, anything below becomes 0, right? And by doing that, it says as long as the star is detected, it's past the threshold, it becomes a 1, and now you have a small circle that fully covers the star, or it doesn't.
Right, and that's why I said what I think it works great as long as your stars are big enough and you're not getting noise in there, and so it works especially well on cleaner data or data that's sampled well enough that your stars go across a few pixels.
Yeah, you definitely run into problems when you have these small stars, in the background that are really faint, and they're kind of at the same brightness level as your noise background, right? You get false stars or non-detected stars in there.
Right.
Awesome. That's a great explanation.
But yep, so that's what I have, Adam. That's all I have for tonight.
All right. I don't see any other question. Oh, maybe do I see one question? Could you do the same thing with the Alex is asking? Could you do the same thing with the threshold process in Photoshop? And is that I guess the same thing as binarize, right?
I have yet to have luck using the threshold in Photoshop, to be honest, and I've tried it several different times.
Well, it's essentially the same type of thing. You're saying anything above the threshold you set becomes a 1, anything below is 0, right? But you don't have access to the wavelet category, structure and PixInsight that allows you to identify the stars and then do the thresholding on top of that, right?
You're trying to manually do what math can do for you in a split second, and it might take you a lot longer.
Right.
So yeah, that's exactly why I talked about working back and forth more with PixInsight on masks, especially to deal with stars.
I'll throw in one more question. Hasta la vista green and SCNR. It's considered noise removal. What does it do that's noise removal as opposed to something like green reduction? Does it actually, what smarts does it have, I guess is the question. Does anyone know the answer to that?
It's a really simple function, right? It's just a min function between the green and the red and blue channels, right? So all you're really doing is you're doing an average of your red and blue, and if that's different than your green, then you set it to the red and blue value, right? So you're just kind of normalizing the green to the effective brightness of the red and blue. So it just kind of kills anything where the green really stands out above the red and blue and brings it in line with the red and blue.
Gotcha, that makes sense. And that explains why it works so well.
Yeah, it also explains why if you have like yellows and stuff like that where you've got a blend of red and green, it doesn't really kill that. You retain the yellow color because it's still part of the red-green mix. It's not really above the red or blue.
And it's working with the assumption that since there is nothing that's green up there, anything that is green is noise.
Yeah, just don't try to use it if you have a Hanny's VWERP.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a great presentation. Thank you, Josh.
Very much. Good.
Excellent.
I don't see any other questions out there, but I do want to remind you at the end of the session, next week's session, imaging products, best imaging products of 2015. And there is a thread in CN and beginner and intermediate imaging right now where if you want to contribute or submit something as a best imaging product or just comment on what we've brought up so far, feel free. But again, I want to thank Josh for presenting, and also one more time I'm going to say if you have any ideas for presentations or know anyone that could present, get in touch with me, whether it be on Google Plus or Cloudy Nights or pretty much anywhere else, and we'll get you all hooked up. So thank you, and guys, we will see you next week. Good night.